I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe that she was still alive, that she was still breathing.
I'm playing with angels now. See you soon.
Very tragic, and I couldn't imagine going through that as a mother. It's just, I'm speechless. I don't know what to think right now.
On November 20th, 2012, a quiet, peaceful neighborhood in Bentonville, Arkansas was forever changed. A 6-year-old girl, whose bright smile had once been a symbol of innocence, was found murdered just steps from the very place that should have been her safe haven, her own home. What seemed like an ordinary morning in a small town quickly spiraled into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. Jersey Bridgeman, a child full of life and potential, was gone, taken by an unspeakable act of violence that shook the community to its core.
This is the true story of Jersey Bridgeman, a tragedy that not only devastated a family, but sent shockwaves through Bentonville. A case that sparked endless questions. How could this happen in a place like Bentonville? How did those entrusted with her safety fail her so completely? And perhaps most haunting of all, how did a seemingly safe community allow this to happen right under its nose? Jersey's story is more than just a tale of heartbreak and loss. It is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist, even in the most secure environments. It forces us to examine the very systems that are meant to protect the innocent. This is a story that challenges us to rethink what safety truly means and what happens when trust is betrayed. From the quiet streets of Bentonville to the hearts of those who loved her, Jersey Bridgeman's tragic death still echoes, leaving behind a trail of sorrow, questions, and a deep longing for answers. Born on November 14, 2006, Jersey Bridgeman entered the world with all the innocence and hope that comes with the first breath of a child. Her bright smile, infectious laughter, and the sparkle in her eyes made her the heart of her neighborhood. Everyone who met her couldn't help but be drawn to her warmth. She was a child full of life, one who brought joy to all who knew her. But as is often the case in a world full of hidden struggles, that innocent facade was just that, a facade that masked the deep-rooted family turmoil she was enduring behind closed doors. Jersey's early years were anything but simple. Her parents' separation, a painful and bitter break that is never easy for any child, cast a long shadow over her childhood. As her mother and father's relationship deteriorated, Jersey found herself trapped in the midst of a conflict that no child should ever have to bear. The love and stability that every child needs were torn apart, leaving Jersey vulnerable and lost in a world she didn't fully understand. Her father and stepmother, in their attempt to navigate the complexity of co-parenting after the separation, began to make choices that would forever change Jersey's life. What started as efforts to discipline and control her behavior spiraled into decisions that would call into question not just their judgment, but their very ability to protect the child they were meant to care for. They resorted to extreme measures, actions that were meant to control her, but instead left deep emotional and physical scars. Instead of providing safety and support, these decisions, born from frustration, fear, and a misguided sense of control, created an environment where Jersey's safety was compromised, and her well-being neglected. The consequences of these actions were far-reaching, setting the stage for a tragedy that would eventually take the life of this young girl. Behind her innocent smile lay the silent pain of a childhood lost, a pain that, tragically, would be ignored until it was too late. On the evening of November 19, 2012, everything appeared to be as it should. The night was calm, and the town of Bentonville seemed to settle into its usual rhythm. Jersey, now living with her mother, Desiree, was safe at home, surrounded by the comfort of familiar faces and routines. Her mother had returned late from work, tired but relieved to find her daughters in good hands. They were entrusted to the care of their longtime neighbors, Zachary and Amanda Holly, a couple who had often babysat Jersey and her younger sister. This was supposed to be an ordinary evening, another night where the children were tucked into bed, the world outside quiet and still. Desiree kissed her girls goodnight, unaware that this routine, so often filled with love and trust, would soon take a devastating turn. Jersey, as always, fell asleep easily, wrapped in the warmth of her home and the familiarity of her caregivers. The Hollis, dependable and familiar, were entrusted with her safety just as many times before. In the silence of the night, it seemed that nothing could go wrong. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. But as midnight passed, that all changed. Something went horribly wrong, a shift in the dark that no one could have predicted. The calm of the night was shattered when Jersey was suddenly missing, her absence unknown and unnoticed until it was far too late. What should have been an uneventful evening turned into a nightmare that no one in the town of Bentonville could have imagined. In the stillness of the night, while the rest of the world slept, Jersey's fate was sealed. The trust placed in those who were supposed to protect her would be betrayed, and a chain of tragic events would follow, a series of decisions that would ultimately lead to the loss of a young life. The innocence of an ordinary night, so fragile and fleeting, was forever lost. When the morning came, the sun rising over the quiet streets of Bentonville, a dark reality began to unfold. Jersey was missing. The house that had been filled with warmth and comfort the night before was now empty, save for the unsettling silence that hung in the air. Desiree, frantic with worry, searched her home and called on Zachary and Amanda Holly, desperate for answers. But the minutes stretched into hours, and the uncertainty deepened. No one could find Jersey. She was gone, vanished in the span of a few fleeting hours. The search began in earnest. Neighbors rallied together, searching the streets, asking questions, their voices thick with confusion and growing fear. But as the hours ticked by, and the air grew heavier with dread, the unthinkable happened. Jersey's tiny, lifeless body was discovered in an abandoned house at the edge of the neighborhood, just steps away from the home where she should have been safe. Her life, full of untapped potential and innocence, was brutally stolen in a crime that no family should ever have to face. A crime that shattered not only a mother's heart, but also the sense of security in a community that had once believed such horrors could never touch their quiet town. No one could comprehend how this had happened, how a child who had been entrusted to trusted hands had fallen victim to such a violent, unimaginable act. The shockwaves rippled far beyond the immediate family. The death of a child in such a manner rattled everyone, leaving behind an unshakable grief and the kind of questions that linger in the dark corners of every heart. What happened in those final moments? How did a tragedy of this magnitude unfold in the safety of what was supposed to be Jersey's home? The answers, they soon realized, would be far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Detectives worked around the clock, tirelessly piecing together every detail, every clue, as they tried to make sense of the horror that had unfolded in the quiet neighborhood. With every hour that passed, the gravity of the situation grew heavier, and the search for answers became all-consuming. Jersey's murder wasn't just a tragedy, it was a puzzle, one with missing pieces that needed to be found, no matter the cost. As the investigation unfolded, the focus began to shift toward those closest to Jersey on that fateful night. Zachary Holly, one of the very individuals entrusted with Jersey's care, was brought in for questioning. He seemed cooperative, initially, offering his version of events and even providing a DNA sample without resistance. But as the hours wore on, his initial cooperation started to raise more questions than it answered. There was something unsettling about his calm demeanor, something that didn't add up. The more the investigators delved into his background, the more inconsistencies they uncovered. At first, Holly's involvement appeared to be nothing more than a tragic coincidence. But mounting forensic evidence told a different story, a story that would soon turn everything on its head. DNA samples from the crime scene, collected with painstaking precision, began to tie Holly to the murder. Forensic experts confirmed what the investigators had already feared. The evidence was damning. Jersey's fate had not been sealed by a stranger lurking in the shadows, but by someone who had been entrusted with her safety, someone who had gained her trust, only to betray it in the most horrific way. With each new discovery, the case began to unravel in a way that felt both surreal and undeniable. What had begun as a seemingly routine evening of babysitting had transformed into a chilling murder mystery that would grip not only Bentonville, but the entire nation. Questions swirled. How could someone so close to Jersey commit such an unspeakable act? And more importantly, how could the community, which had once considered Zachary Holly a trusted figure, have missed the warning signs? As investigators dug deeper into the case, the truth began to emerge piece by disturbing piece. What initially appeared to be a tragic accident, an unspeakable act in a quiet, safe neighborhood, quickly revealed itself to be far more sinister. This wasn't a random act of violence, or a momentary lapse of judgment. It was a calculated, deliberate crime, carefully planned and executed with chilling precision. The evidence, once collected and analyzed, told a story of manipulation, betrayal, and horrific intent. Jersey's life had not been taken in a chaotic burst of anger or an unthinking crime of passion. It had been stolen, methodically and with cold intent. Each new piece of evidence uncovered raised more questions, exposing layers of deceit that had been hidden in plain sight. Investigators uncovered troubling patterns in Zachary Holly's behavior, moments of questionable conduct that, in hindsight, painted a much darker picture than anyone had imagined. Forensic evidence revealed that Jersey had been carefully restrained, an act that spoke not just to violence, but to control. She had been suffocated, strangled with the very clothing she had worn to bed, her pajama bottoms serving as a tool of destruction. The methodical nature of this crime, the way it had been carried out with such forethought, made it clear that this was no random tragedy. The murder of Jersey Bridgeman had been a cold, calculated act from someone who had been in a position of trust. What made this crime all the more disturbing was the fact that it had taken place in a house that Jersey had trusted as a safe space, a place where she was supposed to be protected, where she was meant to feel secure. Instead, that trust had been betrayed, and the innocence of a child had been destroyed in the most horrifying way imaginable. The courtroom became the stage for one of the most distressing trials in Bentonville's history. What was once a small, quiet town now found itself in the midst of a public reckoning, with the eyes of the community and the nation focused squarely on the fate of Zachary Holly. As the trial unfolded, it became a gripping and heartbreaking spectacle, with every detail of Jersey's tragic death laid bare for all to see. The reality of what happened to that young girl, once shrouded in mystery, was now being pieced together in front of an audience that could scarcely comprehend the depth of the horror. In a dramatic showdown, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence that left little room for doubt. Forensic analysis, DNA samples, and testimony from investigators painted a clear picture of guilt, showing just how thoroughly Holly's actions had been exposed. The evidence was irrefutable. Jersey had been carefully and intentionally harmed, and the one person who had been trusted to care for her was the very person responsible for her death. Witnesses took the stand, recounting chilling details that made the brutality of the crime all the more vivid. Experts testified about the methodical nature of the murder, emphasizing how it was carried out with a precision that only someone with knowledge of the child's routines and vulnerabilities could possess. Jersey's final moments were pieced together from forensic evidence that, though harrowing, painted a stark and undeniable image of betrayal. The prosecution left no stone unturned. Each argument, each piece of evidence, was meticulously presented, creating a case that was not just based on facts, but on the heartbreaking reality of a child's life being stolen from her by someone who should have been her protector. In the face of this mounting evidence, the defense was left with little to counter. There was nowhere to hide, no excuse to offer. The truth was plain for all to see, and it was as damning as it was tragic. On May 20th, 2015, after weeks of tense legal battles and gut-wrenching testimony, Zachary Holly was convicted on multiple counts, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The verdict reverberated through Bentonville as a community grappling with the horror of what had unfolded. He was sentenced to the maximum penalty, capital punishment, 2 life terms, and an additional 20 years. For many, the sentence offered a sense of justice, a glimpse of closure in a case that had torn their town apart. But even as the gavel came down and the weight of the decision settled into the minds of the courtroom, a deeper sense of unease lingered in the hearts of the community. Questions that had haunted the town from the very beginning remained unanswered. How could someone who had been entrusted with a child's care betray that trust so completely? What had driven Zachary Hawley to commit such a heinous crime against a young, defenseless girl? And perhaps most disturbingly, how had a trusted member of the community become capable of such unspeakable violence? For those who had known Hawley, the verdict was almost incomprehensible. A man who had once been seen as a dependable neighbor, a friend. How could that person be the same one responsible for such brutality? The community was left to grapple with these contradictions, haunted by the image of a trusted figure now standing convicted of a crime that no one could have imagined in their wildest nightmares. Despite the guilty verdict, a sense of unresolved tension remained. There were no easy answers, no satisfying closure. The sentencing may have marked the end of the trial, but for Bentonville, it was merely the beginning of a long, painful journey toward understanding the darkness that had unfolded right under their noses. Today, the case of Jersey Bridgeman remains a poignant reminder of how fragile trust can be. A child, entrusted to the care of those closest to her, taken from this world in an unimaginable act of violence. Her untimely death has left a permanent scar on the heart of Bentonville. But it is not only the tragedy of her loss that lingers. It is the profound realization that the systems meant to protect our children failed her in the most devastating way possible. Jersey's story has sparked ongoing debates that reach far beyond Bentonville. It has ignited conversations about the very fabric of our child protection systems, about how we can truly safeguard the most vulnerable among us. How could those who were supposed to care for her have failed so tragically? What changes must we demand in order to ensure that no other child suffers the same fate? The answers to these questions remain elusive, and yet the call for reform echoes across the nation. For the community of Bentonville, the questions are not just legal or political, they are deeply personal. Each family, each parent, is left to confront the uncomfortable reality that the very systems they trust may not always work as they should. The quiet, small-town world that had once seemed so safe, so predictable, has been shattered. In its place, there is a collective longing for justice, for understanding, and for the peace that can only come from knowing that steps are being taken to prevent such horrors from happening again. As Jersey's memory lives on, so too does the resolve of those who continue to search for answers. Her tragic death is a call to action, a plea for a world where every child is safe and every family can trust that their children will be cared for, not just in the moment, but for the rest of their lives. For Jersey, and for every child, the fight for justice and protection endures. As we conclude this investigation, the questions remain, questions that, despite the passage of time, continue to haunt not just the community of Bentonville, but all of us. How can we better protect our vulnerable? How can we ensure that the systems meant to safeguard them are not just in place, but truly effective? And perhaps most pressing of all, what can we learn from the haunted shadows of the past, from a tragedy that never should have happened? Jersey's story is more than a painful chapter in the history of one small town. It is a warning, a call to action that reverberates far beyond the boundaries of Bentonville. Her memory endures as a testament to the need for change. Her death serves as a solemn reminder that we cannot afford to be complacent, that we must challenge the systems that are meant to protect, and demand that they evolve to meet the needs of those most in danger. Jersey's life, her bright spirit, was taken too soon, but in her memory, we find the strength to confront these uncomfortable truths. We are challenged to break the cycle of tragedy, to reshape a world where our children are no longer left vulnerable to the very people who should be protecting them. It is not enough to mourn the past. We must act, learn, and grow from it, so that no other family is forced to endure the pain that Jersey's family has had to bear. Jersey's legacy, though born from heartbreak, is now a call to safeguard the future, to create a world where every child is truly safe and where trust, once broken, can be rebuilt with actions that speak louder than words. Her memory must not fade into the shadows. It must ignite change, inspire reform, and push us to create a world that honors the promise of protection and care for all children.